What does the word gentleman and the word Christian have in common? It's probably not what you think. My name is Stephen Cram, and this is My Apologies. An apology is a reason provided to justify a belief. So if I ask you, why do you believe in aliens? I'm asking you to provide me with an apology, a reason why you believe in aliens. It's not what this video is about, but if you want to leave a comment about that, I'd be interested to hear why you believe in aliens. This channel is about apologies for living a life of faith and virtue. So if something I say here offends you, my apologies. I absolutely love C.S. Lewis. He says things that are so simple, yet so profound, and he consistently blows my mind. So for example, I was reading Mere Christianity, one of his most famous books. It's a book about, basically it provides an apologetic, a reason for why you should believe. First, it talks about theism broadly, and then it gets more specifically into Christianity. So why you should believe theism, and then Christianity more specifically as an option within theism. And I didn't even get past the preface before he said something that blew my mind to the point where I was like, let's start here. Let's talk about that. And he was basically discussing what is a Christian? What does that word mean? And how does he use it in the book Mere Christianity? So Lewis defines Christian as someone who accepts the common doctrines of Christianity. And he's going to say there are two different types of objections he's been seeing to that. But first, let's talk about his definition. One who accepts the common doctrines of Christianity. That leads to the question, what are these common doctrines that need to be believed? Well, so to start out with, C.S. Lewis explains that he sent this book to clergymen, so not just normal people, but actually professional religious people from these four different Christian denominations. He says he sent it to an Anglican minister, a Methodist, a Presbyterian, and a Roman Catholic. And he did this to ensure that he, in his book, wasn't too denominational, wasn't putting too much of his own view based on his own view as a member of the Church of England. He wanted to send it to a Presbyterian and a Roman Catholic and a Methodist as well, just to prove like this isn't just something useful for members of the Church of England. It applies to everyone. It's mere Christianity. So that gives us a little insight into what he would say as far as like the common doctrines of the faith. It's not something that's specific to any one denomination. And then if we look at what he actually wrote about in his book, Mere Christianity, section 2 is all about basically the simple baseline gospel of we're all sinners, we're broken in some way, we needed God to save us, Jesus came, died for our sins, which in some way washes us clean and returns us to communion with the Father. So the baseline gospel, which can be found in the creeds, so I would argue the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, the Athanasian Creed, those are things he would say are like the common doctrines of Christianity based on what he talks about in book 2. And then in book 4, it kind of gives a discussion of the Trinity and why you should believe in a Trinitarian God. So I would argue, basically, for the purposes of this video, what he's calling the common doctrines would be the creeds, which are accepted by all the denominations, and the doctrine of the Trinity, which is basically who God is, which are also accepted by all of these denominations. So ultimately, if you were to sit down with Lewis today, if he was still alive, and you were to ask him, I don't know, what would you call him? CS? Lewis, what do you describe as the common doctrines of Christianity? That's what you say a Christian is. What would you say are the common doctrines? He would probably just say, did you read my book? It's called Mere Christianity. And so, all that aside, we're going to define it as the creeds and the Trinity. So after talking a little bit about how he's going to use the word Christian, according to that definition, he talks about two objections he's been hearing. And we're going to dive into those a little bit. So the first objection is to say, basically, Lewis, who are you to define who is or who isn't a Christian? Who are you to make up this definition? And then the second objection is to say, essentially, couldn't it be that someone who does not believe the common doctrines, but lives a life that is in accordance with what Christ would ask of us, wouldn't they be more of a Christian than someone who says they believe, but doesn't live a life according to those same Doctrines. So basically like a Christian hypocrite, someone who believes the creeds and stuff, but is a total hypocrite, doesn't display works of Christ at all, versus someone who is, say, a Buddhist and lives a really kind, charitable life. Wouldn't they be more in accordance with what it means to be a Christian? Fair argument, right? So we're going to look at these two objections, and we're actually going to start with the second one first, because C.S. Lewis does a lot to dig into that. And I think in explaining his reasoning around objection 2, it actually gives us a lot of insight into what he's saying in reference to objection 1. So we're going to start with that second one. Basically, can't someone who doesn't believe be more of a Christian than someone who does? So Lewis is going to start out by saying essentially that he agrees to a great degree. It makes sense what you're saying, and in some way what you're saying is true, that it's important to live a life that actually looks like Jesus as opposed to just assent to these beliefs, to these doctrines. It's really important to act it out. He's going to give you that. He's going to say it's really charitable. What you're saying makes sense. It's very kind. It's very sensitive towards other people. And even in some sense, you could make a biblical argument for it. So for example, in Matthew, you have the parable of the two sons, in which Jesus says, which of these sons is actually obedient? The one who, when asked to do a task, says, I'm not going to do that. And later on, gives in and does the task anyway. That's one option. Or the son who says, I'm going to go do it right now, and never gets around to it. Which one was actually obedient? Well, the one who said he wasn't going to, but did it actually, is the obedient one, right? And so that could be an argument for what they're saying of isn't it more important that you do rather than you just believe these things? The objector is surely thinking along these lines. Lewis is going to say, I hear what you're saying, but basically it's just not useful to use the word that way. We just can't really use Christian that way. And to explain why, he's going to use another word as an analogy for Christian, and that's the word gentleman. So originally, hundreds of years ago, the word gentleman meant someone who had two things. Number one, land, and number two, a coat of arms. And a coat of arms is something that was given to families back in the day to show that they were noble, that they probably were in the line of kings or royalty in some sense. So it's a status symbol, and it's objective, it's concrete, just like owning land. There's no opinion on whether or not someone owns land. It's just a fact. Either they do or they don't. Either they have a coat of arms or they don't. So if you met those two criteria, then you'd be called a gentleman. It was an objective title, an objective thing you could call someone. So to give a really stark example that kind of conflicts with how we use the word gentleman, you could say, Trevor is a liar, he's a thief, and he's a gentleman. Because the word gentleman had no opinions tied to it. It didn't mean someone who was a good person. It just meant they owned land and they had a coat of arms. So you could be a liar, a thief, and a gentleman. Whereas now, the word has changed. People started to look at the word and say, you know what? Isn't it more important that someone acts like what a gentleman should act like, as opposed to having land? Isn't the way someone acts more important? Which is true, yes. But in doing so, they make the word a simple synonym for good. They've taken away the meaning of the word. It no longer means something objective, meaning they own land and are in the line of royalty. Now, you can no longer say that this person is a liar, a thief, and a gentleman. Now, the way we use it, if I hold the door open for a woman, she may say, what a gentleman, right? And what she doesn't mean is that I own land. What she means is I approve of your behavior. It's become a simple synonym for good, or a simple synonym for thank you. And to refer to someone as not a gentleman, he's not a gentleman, what I'm not saying is something, it used to not be an insult. If you were to say Johnny's not a gentleman, you didn't mean he's a jerk. You just meant he doesn't own land, or maybe he does own land, but he's not in the line of royalty. Right, so he doesn't fit the category of gentleman. It wasn't an insult. Now, if you say he's not a gentleman, you're just offending him. You're just saying an insult, which you could say in a number of other ways. So Lewis's point is the word gentleman went from being something that had concrete meaning to being something that is basically just a throwaway word. It has no new meaning. Lewis says, to call a man a gentleman in this new refined sense becomes, in fact, not a way of giving information about him, but a way of praising him. To deny that he is a gentleman becomes simply a way of insulting him. When a word ceases to be a term of description and becomes merely a term of praise, it no longer tells you facts about the object. It only tells you about the speaker's attitude to the object. In the same way as gentlemen, if we use the word Christian in this refined sense, it loses its meaning. It ceases to mean someone who believes X and Y, and it now begins to mean someone whose behavior you approve of. Followers of Christ, or people who go to church, would find themselves not being able to use it anymore. Because if you think that the word Christian only refers to people who are near to the Spirit of Christ, calling someone a Christian requires you to look into their hearts and to judge their behaviors, things that we can't do and we shouldn't do. So we really would have this fear of using the word Christian to apply to anyone, in fear that we would apply to someone who isn't in fact near to Christ and be found foolish. If I say, oh, Johnny's a Christian, and then he goes and cheats on his wife, now he no longer fits our criteria of what a Christian is, and we made a mistake, right? Or, on the other hand, we could use the word Christian, withhold the word Christian from people that we disagree with, or maybe someone who offended us. We could withhold the word Christian and say, they're not a Christian because they didn't do what we see as being Christ-like. And it becomes this bludgeon that can be used against people. So Lewis is basically making the point, we need a concrete definition of Christian, not one that's based on our subjective opinion about people. And this kind of now answers the question, the objection number one, which is, Lewis, who are you to say what a Christian is and what a Christian isn't? And his response is basically, I'm not bringing forward a subjective definition. I'm bringing forward a definition of Christian that transcends the ages, transcends your opinions about one another. It says these are the common doctrines. If you believe those things, regardless of how you're acting in the moment or what I think about you, if you believe those things, you're going to fit into the category of Christian. His summarizing statement says this: the point is not a theological or moral one. It is only a question of using words so that we can all understand what is being said. When a man who accepts the Christian doctrine lives unworthily of it, it is much clearer to say he is a bad Christian than to say he is not a Christian. To use myself as an example, if I believe all the right things, all the common doctrines, but I'm cheating on my wife, addicted to gambling, lying at work, this whole list of sins, Lewis would say he's a bad Christian, not that he's not a Christian at all. And if we think about it, that's kind of the way often the world sees Christians, right? Is either they'll use the word Christian to define someone that they like as good, like a good Christian lady, regardless of what she actually believes, they're just saying they like her. Or they look at Christianity and just see the hypocrisy of it. They see all the bad Christians and think that reflects poorly upon the belief itself, when in fact it just reflects poorly on these people's obedience to what they say they believe, right? So it's even more of a reason why we should try to act in accordance with our beliefs, because Christians are going to be judged by the world based on how they act, not based on what they believe. So the word Christian is this broad category of people who believe. It's not, like he says, a theological or a moral claim. We should also, I think, avoid using the word Christian as a synonym for our particular denominational stances. So, for example, I'm a Baptist, and if I have a friend, Jennifer, who was baptized as a baby, perhaps, I can rightly say she's probably not a Baptist if she still believes those things, or she's baptizing maybe her own children as babies. I might say she's not a Baptist, clearly, but I should avoid saying she's not a Christian, because then I'm making Baptist and Christian synonymous. Or if I was Catholic and I said she doesn't believe in the Assumption of Mary, which you have to do, it would be fine to say she's not a Catholic, perhaps, but we should avoid saying she's not a Christian, because now you're making denominational opinions or denominational stances, which are fair and it's often good. You're making that synonymous with Christian as opposed to just the baseline common doctrines of Christianity. So my question to take away is, do you agree with this stance of C.S. Lewis? Do you agree that the word Christian should just be a definition for objectively those who believe the common doctrines? Or do you think it should be more than that? Leave a comment. Tell me why. The other thing I thought about is, does this same argument apply within denominations as well? So, for example, I love to listen to podcasts. I probably listen to them too much and need to chill out a little bit. But one of my favorites is called Pints with Aquinas, by a guy named Matt Fradd. Love his content. Free plug to Matt. All the weight of those who subscribe to my channel is now thrown at Pints with Aquinas. You're welcome. So on that channel, they'll refer to Catholic politicians that maybe don't legislate or act in accordance with Catholic stances, Catholic dogma. And my question is, does Catholic here mean those who just believe the dogmas and the doctrines, or is it someone who acts in accordance with them? Basically the same thing C.S. Lewis is kind of parsing out. Does that apply to Catholics as well? Is ex-politician who maybe is believes all the right things, goes to church on Sunday, goes to mass on Sundays, but might be pro-abortion, is that person not a Catholic at all because of his stance? Or is he just a bad Catholic? Food for thought. I'd love to hear what you'd think. Please leave a comment, and I'm a firm believer in face-to-face conversations. So if you leave a comment below, I'd love to encourage you to also have a conversation along these lines with someone in real life. Maybe a friend, someone at work. Let's bring the conversation off the internet exclusively and into our everyday lives. So until next time, my name is Steven, and this has been My Apology.